All right, well, let's get started. And we got a lot to cover tonight. So if you've got your 101 books, so if you don't mind, there you are, Gary. I see you. So we'll just do our short prayers. So page 5, the short refuge prayer and the 4 immeasurable qualities. We'll do that tonight. So we recite twice in English, once in Tibet, and try and make it heartfelt. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chonam la shangju pardu dagni kapsu chi dagi jinso ki pe sonam gi jola panshir sangye ju sho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yampe sentient tam she dewa dang dewe gurdang dempar jorchi. Dug now dang da now gi gu dang drawar jorchi. Dug now me pe de wa dang mi drawar jorchi. Me ring jack dang ni dang drawe tang nam la ne par jorchi. Okay, thank you. So what we've been talking about up till now has been the jewel ornamental liberation, and we've been going through chapter by chapter, and we've been talking about the method to be able to attain enlightenment. So we're going through step by step how to do that, and we've been talking about how to recognize suffering, the causes of suffering, and how to overcome suffering, and and that was identified as being the attachment to samsara's pleasures. So, in other words, the pleasures of the ocean of suffering, that we don't realize that these things that we attach to, they might in the beginning seem like they're really wonderful, but over time things change and our minds change, and they become sources of suffering for us. Not the least of which is our own body, which as we're a young person, we're enjoying things, we can do almost anything that we want to do, but as we get older and older, the less ability we have to be able to do those things that we used to do when we were young and so on. So our body then starts to become an impediment to our happiness. You know, we start having aches and pains and illnesses and thoughtlessness and confusion and so on that we didn't have when we were younger. So we need ways to be able to recognize that very fact, and then what the causes of that is and how to overcome them. So we talk about them as overcoming or becoming the antidote to attachment of samsara's pleasures. So now in chapter 7, we get into a little bit more of an abstract idea, and that is the antidote to the attachment of the pleasure of peace. because we all would like to have peace. We all want peace. We all view peace as being happiness, as being something where everything is calm and good and wholesome and so on like that. But we can get attached to that peacefulness. And when the peacefulness is not stable for any number of reasons, then it becomes great suffering. So the main example of this is in the beings who are the practitioners who are practicing selfishly for their own enlightenment and not for the enlightenment of other beings. That selfishly they want enlightenment for themselves. So these are the Shravakas. You've heard that name many times in our prayers, the Shravakas, or the Pratyeka Buddhas. You've heard that name. And these are the hearers and the solitary realizers. So in the very first class that we talked about in Buddhism 101, where we were talking about the 5 families of the Buddha, we were talking about these hearers and the solitary realizers. And these are the arhats, these are the practitioners who are in the early days of the Buddha's teachings. He was teaching these people to apply discipline for their own sake, so that because they were leading lives of unwholesomeness, doing terrible things, doing the 5 misdeeds and so on, killing people and lying to people and stealing and sexual deviation and drinking to excess and so on like that. So he was teaching that the first thing you got to do is you got to discipline yourself. And by doing that, I want you to start wearing robes. I want you to shave your hair. I want you to join the monastery as a means to be able to focus on your virtue, on your wholesomeness, and not be swayed by all these other things and so on. But as we do that, we begin to attach to that peacefulness. And then when we lose that peacefulness for any number of reasons, then we get upset and we're lost again. And we have to understand further what we need to do. So in this first stage, this discipline is identified as what we call now the Hinayana. The yana means a vehicle. So there's 3 basic vehicles in Buddhism. There's the Hinayana, there's the Mahayana, and there's the Vajrayana. So the 3 vehicles. The Hinayana is sometimes referred to as the lesser vehicle, or it's better to address it as the foundational vehicle. It's lesser in terms of it doesn't bring in all sentient beings. It's focused on the individual, for the individual to discipline themselves, to be able to develop one-pointed mindfulness. And it's teaching meditation, and it's teaching the idea of Buddhahood. It's teaching, the true nature. But the motivation is to have your own enlightenment with no regard for other beings. In the Mahayana, that's the great vehicle, or the middle way teachings. That's when we introduce the idea of the bodhisattva, the holy enlightened being. That's when we introduce the idea of bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And it's when we open the idea for emptiness, and we open the idea for the 2 truths. So the middle way has got a lot of stuff in there that is not included in the basic teachings of discipline. So many of the practitioners in the Hinayana would be going off into their hermitages and so on, and spending many, many years in their hermitages and to attain enlightenment. And when they are confronted with their selfishness, it's like the bottom just kind of falls out of whatever their practice was. When thoughts of others come up, when thoughts of their families come up, when thoughts of suffering sentient beings, if they were to come out of their hermitage and go into the villages and so on, and they would see all this suffering, they were unprepared for this because all they were thinking about was their personal peace. So these were the Shravakas and these were the Pratyeka Buddhas. So does anybody have any question about these ideas right now? Can you understand what I'm talking about? Okay. So to be able to understand this pleasures of peace, we need to understand now what we've been taking for granted as loving kindness and compassion. And we need to expand the horizon of the way in which we look at loving kindness and compassion. So it says here in the handout that I sent to everybody, and if you didn't print it, you can put it up on your screen, or I can just read it to you as I have it here in front of me. So it says here that the teachings on the practice of loving kindness and compassion are the remedy to being attached to the pleasure of peace. So what does attachment to the pleasure of peace mean? It is the desire to achieve nirvana only for oneself, without an altruistic mind for sentient beings. And because of it, one does not benefit others. This is called the lesser vehicle, or the Hinayana. So it's this selfish liberation. Long as I get liberated, I'm okay. And many people around the world have this view of Buddhism, that's their view of Buddhism, that is their enlightenment, and they're not paying attention to other beings, that it's a selfish enlightenment. However, for those who have gone to the next step, to the Mahayana, let me explain it this way. Buddhism back in the day, when the Buddha was alive, it was all in northern India. And then as the 50 years he was teaching, it started spreading down into southern India. And then it started going into what was called Ceylon, the island of Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And then it was also going up through the northeast of India and going down through Burma, Myanmar, and started going down into Southeast Asia, going down into Thailand, into Laos, into Cambodia, and into Vietnam. And And so the early Buddhists were going into Southeast Asia, and it was kind of like staying there. It was going into southern India, into Ceylon, and it was kind of staying there as the Hinayana teachings. Later on, after the Buddha passed and several hundred years later, and that migration, then as it got up into China and got up into Japan and into Korea, that became the middle way teachings. The middle way became very popular with that. And that was the Mahayana teachings. So those were the Pure Land teachings, or the teachings of the Buddha field. And and then the idea of the Bodhisattva was being introduced. So this was around actually about the time of Christ, about the time between the common era, before the common era and then the common era coming. So it was about that time when those teachings became very popular for the middle way. So the Pure Land teachings were the idea that we're doing things for the benefit of others and not just selfishly for ourselves. But you see, pictures of those monks and those people that are in Southeast Asia, and they're usually wearing those bright saffron color robes. It's got a shawl that is very brightly colored, a yellow, orange, and they're usually not even wearing a shirt because it's hot there. And they have a yellow skirt, that matches the same color as their shawl, and so on. And these are now called the Theravadins, which means the elders, the teachings of the elders, which goes back to this early time and so on. And they hold on to that. They hold on to that. They don't follow the Bodhisattva. They hold on to the Hinayana. They are interested in developing their own enlightenment. So this is when they hear the reference of being the Hinayana, of being the lesser vehicle, they have great offense against that. They don't think that that's correct. They think that their way is correct, and that the middle way, or the Vajrayana, is a blasphemy or whatever against that. So we need to understand, these very basic ideas and the differences between these people that are practicing these in these different ways, and why they are as they are. The Mahayana and the Vajrayana incorporate, they bring in the Hinayana. They're not dismissing it. They're bringing it in. It becomes the foundation of their practices, of their teachings. The Hinayana just stays with that. They don't go to what the evolution of what the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha was teaching this the whole time, but those people weren't hearing it. So they only heard the part about the discipline, and they stayed with that.
Excuse me, Lance.
Yes, sir.
I am not fully understanding what the worldview or what the purpose, how the Hinayana viewed enlightenment. What was enlightenment if they did not care about other people? How the two words, the two concepts clash to me: enlightenment and not caring about other people. And this is how you're describing the Hinayana to me, and I'm not absorbing that.
Well, it's that when they achieve enlightenment, that they become a Buddha. That they become the Buddha. They reach this nirvana, that is indestructible, that is perfection of the mind, of the realization of the mind, and so on. And they expect to become the Buddha. So they have this expectation. They have this attachment to themselves. They haven't lost that attachment to themselves because it's their enlightenment. It's not an enlightenment that all beings share, as is taught in the Bodhisattva, in the Mahayana. That everybody becomes enlightened at the same time. That's the point of the Mahayana, that the Bodhisattvas postpone their enlightenment for the sake of helping other beings to become enlightened. And then together they all become perfectly enlightened. So they just hold back.
Bodhisattvas postpone absolute peace for themselves to join other people's struggles. Is that what you're saying? And to
not to join their trouble, not to join their troubles, but to help people through their troubles, through their suffering, recognizing the suffering of other beings and being there to help them overcome their suffering. So the suffering of the Bodhisattvas, they've overcome the emotions. These great Bodhisattvas, they've overcome the emotions. That they've done. What they're holding back on is the obscuration of wisdom. They're still holding on to themselves as helping other beings. So they still have an identity that they are helping other beings, but they're doing that voluntarily to help other beings, and they're satisfied with that. But at the point that they can release that and let go of that obscuration of having to help other beings, then they can become Buddha. So we call that the obscuration of wisdom.
That is, I understand what you're saying, but that is a quandary given the world as it is. I don't see how any one of us can make progress towards Buddhahood if we're stuck in the tempest of the time. And I understand that we're stuck in the tempest of the time because it is there. And we can meditate, we can continue to practice, but the world hasn't changed fundamentally in thousands of years. Just the tools of violence have gotten worse, so we're still stuck in that maelstrom. And I don't see how we can meditate, we can get quieter inside. But what I'm hearing you say is we must not abandon the noise because the noise needs our help. If we don't do that, how do we find peace?
Well, you're looking at it from one particular point of view.
Yes.
You're looking at it from the point of view of an ordinary person.
Which I am.
Of course. However, there is the point of view of the Bodhisattva. And there is the point of view of the Buddha. So in past teachings, we've learned that the Buddhas are in the midst of the 6 realms of human existence. And they are unharmed by it. They are not suffering being in those realms. They are there for the benefit of others. So they have no emotions. They've overcome the emotions. They've overcome the obscuration of wisdom, obscuration of the mind. And they're not even, they're like the sun that is just shining with no awareness of itself, no expectation. The Bodhisattva has no emotion, but it still is aware of itself. It's aware of the job that it's doing for the benefit of others. It doesn't have an expectation.
Okay.
It doesn't have, but it is aware that it is doing this work. So there are many beings in our midst now, in the world, who are bodhisattvas. We may not recognize them because we only have the point of view of an ordinary person. And until we can awaken our consciousness level to be able to transcend that of an ordinary person, we can begin to glimpse and we can begin to see and recognize these beings. And we can begin to do the practices of the deity yoga, and we can begin to experience this within ourselves and experience the bodhisattva and experience the true nature of the Buddha within ourselves. But as long as we remain as an ordinary person, we're ignorant of those things. We don't know what we're missing. We don't even know that. That's how ignorant we are. We don't even know that it's there, that there is a transcendent mind. I would say to you and everybody else that, maybe 6 months ago or so, before we all met and you started hearing about these things, you didn't know about those things. We were all deluded in thinking we knew pretty much everything that we needed to know, but yet there was this curiosity that we wanted to find out about this Buddhism. So we opened the door to find out about that. So now we've opened the door, and now we find there's all this other stuff that we didn't know about before. Does this make sense to you?
I see where you're going with this. It's it's too much to wrap our arms around here in this session, but I get a taste of what you're saying, and viscerally I understand it. I just can't put it in words.
Well, we're going to try and help, and it's a process. So remember, this is an introduction. This is Buddhism 101. We're trying to establish a vocabulary. We're trying to introduce some fundamental teachings, some doctrine teachings, just some very basic points on which many, 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 many other teachings and practices are based upon. So don't expect that we're going to achieve enlightenment, in 8 classes. It may take 8 lifetimes. But we got to start someplace. So, and this is, this is our beginning part. This is how we start. It's an introduction. So please have patience and take it in and make notes. And then, what we talk about here for these 2 hours are really just intended for you, for everybody, to review your notes during the week. That's your homework, is to develop a practice and say, okay, I spent 2 hours, listening to this stuff and maybe thinking about it. Now I have to go through a contemplation to try and understand this. I have to investigate this some more. And maybe it means Googling some things. Maybe it means getting some books, reading about things. Maybe it means talking with other people. But this is not meant just for 2 hours. You're going to come here and anybody's going to expect to attain any kind of a level of enlightenment or anything like that.
Lance?
Yes.
Would you give an explanation of Vajrayana?
Yes. Vajrayana, Vajra means indestructible, the indestructible wisdom. Vajra is the dorje. In Tibet, they call it the dorje. And it's what it's representative of in the Hindu, which is what Buddhism came out of. This was a thunderbolt, or this was a diamond, an indestructible diamond, an indestructible that had such power like a thunderbolt. So this is called a Vajra in Sanskrit. It means indestructible wisdom. So we hold this at our heart. And it means this indestructible wisdom. So the Vajrayana is the vehicle of this wisdom, of this Buddha wisdom. The indestructible wisdom is the wisdom of the Buddha. Remember I said just a moment ago that the Bodhisattva has the obscuration of wisdom. The Buddha has no obscuration of wisdom, is wisdom. So this indestructible
Vajra is
wisdom.
also a weapon, right?
What was that?
I said the Vajra is also a weapon, isn't it? Or it used to be.
No, it's never a weapon. In Buddhism, it's not a weapon.
But was
Buddhism,
it?
it's not a wisdom. And in Hinduism, it may be a weapon, you know, but it's not regarded as it's a symbol of indestructible wisdom, manifest in the heart center. Now, if you have an example of what you think that this is being used as a weapon, then let me know. And if your point is that this is a weapon against non-virtue, you know, a holy weapon against non-virtue, wisdom being that, well, that I can appreciate. But this is not being used to hit somebody over the head or subdue somebody with this object. It's what this object symbolizes is wisdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I was thinking about it when I said that is the Vajra kind of resembles a mace that used to be a weapon, and it's a very powerful weapon as well.
Well, that all comes out of the Hindu.
Right.
Remember, the Buddhism comes out of Hinduism, like Christianity comes out of Judaism. So many of the references and so on have been purified from the old ways. So new meanings have come to them. Only virtue comes out of the Buddhist teachings. You know, we learn about non-virtue so that we can meet it with the fierceness that we need to, with the compassion that we need to be able to subdue it. But it's not being annihilated. Okay, so did that answer your question, Bonnie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So now we go to this next statement here. It says, but if one develops loving kindness and compassion, then one is attached to sentient beings and dares not attain liberation only for oneself. Therefore, one should practice loving kindness and compassion. So what this means is that in Hinayana, it's learning about wisdom. It's learning about compassion, but it's only for your own benefit. You're not thinking of it in terms of others. You have sympathy for others. You can recognize that other beings are suffering, but that's their problem. You're not there to solve their problem. You've got enough to solve your problem, and that's where you stop, with your problem, with your enlightenment. And that's the Shravaka, that's the Pratyeka Buddha. Now, that's not to say that the Shravaka or the Pratyeka Buddha doesn't have good qualities, because to be able to at least be aware of oneself in that way means that you're on an understanding path to be able to understand virtue and that which, you know, you're holding back. But still you have obscuration, you still have emotions, you still have self-grasping and self-clinging. The Arhat is that yogi who goes off into the caves or the hermitages by themselves. That's the Arhat, who is the Shravaka or the Pratyeka Buddha. All these names kind of are intertwined with each other, and they all refer to their own individual liberation. That's what Pratyeka Buddha means. Pratyeka means individual, and Buddha means liberation. The Pratyeka Buddha, individual liberation. And the Shravaka is the hearer, is listening to all this and then trying to process it in some way, but it's very limited. So that's the purpose of this chapter, you see, to be able to really define this, to be able to understand this pleasure of peace. You know, that the notion of peace is a concept, like all the other concepts. And if you recall that when we talk about Buddhahood, when we talk about Dharmakaya, we always talk about the non-conceptual. We always use that word. We always talk about primordial, the unborn, non-conceptual. Peace is a concept. The opposite of peace would be war. There's a duality there. That's human nature. So to be able to transcend that. But here we are clinging to this idea of peace. If I get enlightenment, I will be peaceful. That's all I need. Until you start thinking about your mother, your father, your sons and your daughters and your friends and images of people that are lying in the streets dead or maimed or something like that, then you get upset. That peace is shattered. So what we're trying to do is to get non-conceptual. So that comes through this practice, these practices that we're learning about. So the love, yes.
Excuse me, you spoke of an arhat going off to the cave to find their own enlightenment or liberation. Would they choose not to come back as a bodhisattva or?
They have no concept of the bodhisattva.
Oh, okay.
It hasn't been introduced to them yet.
Oh, okay.
Until they could be there. And this is what happens. You know, many of us learn, it's like they say, when you're in an airplane and when the air, what do you say, the oxygen cups come down, the first thing you got to do is put it on yourself. Then you can put it on your kid or anybody around you can help them. You got to save yourself first. So the process of being an arhat is you get to this threshold of a realization that I can't attain enlightenment knowing that other beings are suffering. Those that hold on to that enlightenment and say, I don't care about them, well, those are the beings that are suffering themselves. They continue to be suffering. But those beings who say, oh, you know what? This isn't working because it doesn't include everybody else. And as long as they're suffering, I'm suffering because I'm spiritual. We're all connected. I got to come out of the cave and I have to engage with all these other people to help them attain enlightenment. Then you become the bodhisattva.
Thank you.
Lance?
Yes.
So there are Buddhas in the world now, is that correct?
Sure.
Are they suffering?
No.
But there are people around them who are suffering.
Yes.
How can they not be suffering? I'm trying to catch up to you here. How can they not be suffering if there is suffering all around them?
Because they are transcendent. They see that the suffering is caused by individuals who are clinging, grasping to themselves. They're clinging to themselves. They're clinging to the suffering. They're creating their own suffering. The Buddhas are just like the sun. You have to use that image to help you to recognize that. The sun isn't thinking about us. If the sun could think, it's not thinking about that. It's not thinking about itself. The sun is just generating this light and heat. So the Buddhas they are just radiating truth. They are just radiating Dharmakaya. And that's how they can.
That's what they do for us, and it's there for us to have or have not.
Correct. If you go to, in your prayer book, if you got your prayer book handy, and you go to the 7-limb prayer, if you go to the 7-limb prayer, so it's either on my book, it's page 10. I got an older version of what you guys got. I don't know if you got page 7. What page?
7.
Okay. So it says, through the power, it's the second stanza, second line down. It says, through the power of Samantapadra's prayers, may all the Buddhas manifest vividly in my mind. I prostrate to them, multiplying my body as many times as there are atoms in the earth. In each atom, I visualize as many Buddhas as there are atoms. So this is the view that we have to develop. We have to cultivate this view to see that all this is, it's it's like the body of the Buddha. We don't recognize it. We see all this phenomenal nature, and we think it's all permanent, but it's all temporary. It's all a figment of our imaginations that we all conventionally agree upon. But what it's composed of is nothing but pure nature. And we're the ones who are imprinting our negativity on it, our suffering on it. So why do we go to war? Because one side imprints that this belongs to them, this land belongs to them, or this position in the world belongs to them. And the other side says, no, it doesn't. It belongs to all of us, or it belongs to me. So I'm going to fight you for it. Both of them are wrong. But the essence of what it is that they're fighting over is that it's just all an apparition. It's just all an illusion. It's all empty of its true nature.
Lance,
Yes, sir.
don't we have the choice to not have this pain and this sorrow and the suffering? I mean, can't we, don't we have that choice to not have that suffering, not have that?
Sure, and that's what we're working to stabilize that. We make the choice not to want to suffer. How do we do that? So it's indestructible. It's indestructible, the Vajra, that indestructible wisdom that allows us to be able to recognize this as impermanent, as relative, as temporary, as illusory. That's the wisdom. That's what we're trying to get to be able to see that as wisdom, or see that wisdom of the reality of that. It's very subtle, isn't it? This is the stuff that we meditate on. Loving kindness
Yes.
is another way of expressing wisdom. If you have wisdom about the causes of things, and you see somebody, you see your children that are growing up and so on, and you see them about to make their mistakes, and you interact with them and say, look, here's the wisdom. Don't do these things. You know, you're trying to give them loving kindness. And then when they go ahead and do them, in spite of what you said to them, you now have the grace to be able to say, okay, I understand what you did. You know, you're not a bad person, but you had to test what I was trying to tell you. But maybe now you recognize the wisdom yourself. And then you have compassion for them. The actualization of that wisdom. And now let me help you through your suffering. You went ahead and you did this. Now you lost all your money. Now you wrecked the car. Now you broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Now you burned your hand on the stove, whatever it is. Let me bandage your hand because now you got a big burn blister on your hand. That's compassion. That's the actualization of the wisdom. The method. So there's wisdom and there's method. The loving kindness is the wisdom. The method is the compassion. We have it for ourselves. We have to recognize it for ourselves. And then we have to be able to share that with others. The arhats, the hearers and the solitary realizers, the pratyeka Buddhas, they don't see it that way. You know, they only see it for themselves. They haven't made the jump from themselves, to others. You know, there was a little anecdote I remember about, people that would say when they were in the trenches, like in World War I or something like that. And, and when you knew a Buddhist, and somebody got shot or killed or something, and they're right next to them in the trenches, the Buddhist would say, "Oh, I'm glad it wasn't me." And the guy's laying there, and then other people would try and comfort the guy, try and help him. Maybe he's not dead. The Buddhist would say, "Oh, it's not me." And this was a slam against the Buddhists because people had that selfish idea that they only cared about themselves. When I was in India and I was on a train and I met this, it was an unbelievable story that this should happen to me, an ordinary, a neophyte, and I met this Muslim professor who was traveling to give a lecture, and we wound up sitting next to each other on this train, and he's asking me about Buddhism, and his idea of Buddhism was this selfishness, and I'm having to talk to him about, oh, no, it's not that. And it was, and I could just see light bulbs going off in his head. And this is a professor. This was a guy, who at the time was probably 60 or 70 years old. But he had this lifelong impression about what he thought Buddhists were. Maybe he came from South India where the Theravadins were. Oh, I'm glad it's not me. But the Mahayanas have a whole different approach. The Vajrayana. That was a question you asked me before. It was about Vajrayana. So the Vajrayana is the wisdom tradition of what it is. What is the wisdom mind of the Buddha? That's what I didn't continue the conversation on, Bonnie. I'm sorry. So we learn how to devote ourselves to the Buddha, how we devote ourselves to the Bodhisattva, how we devote ourselves to the enlightenment of other beings. That's the Mahayana. Then the Vajrayana now is, how do I become a Buddha? What is it for me to become a Buddha? How do I identify that? What is that constructed of? And so the Vajrayana is this book of lists, all these different aspects and characteristics of the mind of the Buddha being intellectualized. And then we go through that and so on. And part of that is the practices of the Tantrayana, which is the same. Now we're practicing to become a Buddha. This is where the deity yoga is. The deity yoga is in the Vajrayana. The Mahayana doesn't have the deity yoga. So in the Vajrayana, we begin to do deity yoga to practice what it is to become, what it is to be a Buddha, what it is to be a holy enlightened being, what it is to have bodhicitta. So this is the point of this chapter. This is the loving kindness and the compassion that we're now really drilling down and identifying. This is what it is. Understanding what things that we took for granted before that we thought we understood. Now we're looking at it at another level, from another point of view. That's what we do. Remember, we go around in circles, but the circles are a spiral. And as the spiral gets tighter, we're getting more purified. That which we first knew in this big turning of the circle, Now it gets purified, and now all the misconceptions and so on get purified out, and now we have a tighter circle. But then that gets tighter, and that goes up to the next level. And then we get more purified on that level, and continues up and up and up and up until we get to the perfection. Those are the bhumis. That's what's called the bhumis. So it's very good to have doubts. It's very good to ask questions. It's very good to understand this. But we always have to remember that what we're doing is we're purifying. That which we, at this level, things are true. But then at this level, they're no longer true. Because the truth that we're talking about is a relative truth. You ever hear the saying, one man's floor is another man's ceiling? As soon as we learn something, we find that there's another 20 questions that come up out of that learning. And it's purifying. So that's what this chapter is about, is understanding this, the attachment to what our notion of peace is. And this peace is a relative mindfulness that we are attaching, that we want to have peace. We identify the Buddha with peace. But peace is a dualistic concept. So then we come down into this next section here where it says loving kindness. It says a mind that wants all sentient beings to meet with happiness. So 1, 2, 3, it says loving kindness with sentient beings as his objects. This is ordinary bodhisattva aspiration. Loving kindness with phenomena as its object. This is bodhisattva conduct, the 10 virtues. And non-objectified loving kindness, the bodhisattva path of insight mind, the 8th bhumi, the unborn dharma mind. So what we're parsing, what we're taking apart here, what we're deconstructing is what is loving kindness? How do we look at it? We're looking at it from these 3 different points of view. We're looking at it from first as an ordinary human being, as an ordinary being, the ordinary bodhisattva aspiration. Then as a bodhisattva, and then as a Buddha. So the bodhisattva sees all these beings as all potential bodhisattvas and Buddhas, sees all beings as the same. An ordinary person doesn't see those qualities. They have a delusion, they're ignorant. They don't recognize that every atom within my body are full of are full of Buddhas, and the space around those Buddhas are bodhisattvas. They don't recognize it that way. Well, when we cultivate that mindfulness of that, everything turns around, everything changes. Everything comes alive with new radiance and luminosity, new potential. When we look at it as being pure, as being holy, we are the ones who have made it unholy. We are the ones who screwed it up. You know? Could we go back in time and look, what, 1,000,000 years or 20,000 years, or you pick the time. What was that threshold where beings, Homo sapiens, or the predecessors to Homo sapiens, whatever, instead of looking at things in a pure nature way, began to manipulate and began to conquer other people and began to use hatred and remained ignorant and develop and allowed the poisons to manifest rather than just basking in the enjoyment of being in the sun. of the true nature? What was the threshold? We don't know. And it really doesn't matter. All we know is that we have that realization for ourselves. This is what it is to be reborn. This is what it is to be reborn in this lifetime. This is what it is to have a miraculous rebirth. If you remember, some time ago, we talked about there's 4 modes of birth. There's a womb birth that we're all familiar with. There's an egg birth that we're all familiar with. There is heat and moisture that we should be familiar with, but it's much more, out of our line of sight. We don't see it very often, but that's where the insects and the larvae and so on come from. There's that. But then there's the miraculous rebirth. And this is this very abstract idea of what is this miraculous rebirth? Well, the miraculous birth happens in many different ways. If you continue to do bad things continue to happen to you because you keep having this rebirth as being a negative person, as being a non-virtuous person. And you keep having these situations that come up and you keep acting in the same way and you're getting the same results. You can come out of that by having a miraculous birth of being virtuous from your non-virtue. Every meditation is a death and a rebirth. Every moment is charged with a birth and a death and a rebirth. You are a different person than you were 2 hours ago, just by virtue of hearing the stuff that we're talking about right now. You may not believe it right now, but it's now part of your psyche and you're thinking about it. You're either thinking I'm crazy or you're thinking, how did I miss this? To yourself, you're saying, how did I miss this? It was so obvious. Yes, that makes so much sense. That's rebirth. That is, now you're thinking in terms of someone that has now been enlightened to some degree. You've broken through. How do I continue that? How do I deepen that? This is the miraculous birth. When we talk about Padmasambhava, we just did the Bumsak, a couple of weeks ago. And he talks about Padmasambhava means lotus born. So he wasn't born in the bulrushes of a river or an estuary or something like that. That doesn't make any sense. We're not that deluded anymore. But what it does mean is that he had an epiphany or a series of epiphanies that now he was reborn, being undefiled, having transcended his womb birth on the lotus pedestal that we talked about so many times. And now he is a realized being, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche. So and he is an example of us. We can be like that. That's what we're trying to do. We should recognize that. We should embrace that. We should cultivate that. How can I transcend my suffering? How can I transcend my defilement? So this is all loving kindness. This is all wisdom. Is developing all this, is removing the veils of our ignorance, of our delusions, of being able to recognize this, seeing all this potential. And all the things that are the veils, all the things that are blocking this are the 84,000 emotions, which all come down to the 5 poisons: ignorance, desire, hatred, jealousy, and pridefulness, greediness. So we should be dissecting things. We should be looking at things. We should be meditating every day developing a practice, and being able to apply these words, to these thoughts that we're having. This is the method of compassion for ourselves at being defiled. We're having the wisdom that we are defiled, why we're defiled, how to get out of it, and now the method is how to be able to transcend that, to overcome that. So we talked about the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma. That was the beginning part. Now we're at the part of loving kindness and compassion, wisdom and method. So the loving kindness of phenomena as its object is being able to see all this as phenomenal nature, being able to see this as all temporary. All this is our imagination. When all these atoms come together, making all these molecules and all these things start happening and so on, and we call this a table, we call that the color red, we call this light. We have names for all these manifestations of all this coalescence of matter and energy. And we have these conventions, we agree on this. We're taught to call these things that. But as we dissect them and take them apart, we see that none of these things are of their own pure nature. They're all composites of many other things. And we begin to recognize this compounded nature, and that all these things are just temporary. What is the essence of all these things? So we say that all these things are empty of their own true nature. What is the essence of this? Well, this is what we're trying to get to. This is the Dharmakaya. This is the unborn, non-conceptual awareness. And this is what we talked about last time. We see things in 3 dimensions. We experience things in 3 dimensions. Maybe we have some perception of some higher dimensions. Synchronicity. I'm 3,000 miles away from my loved ones, and I think of my loved one, and then all of a sudden the phone rings and it's my daughter. Is that a dimensional conversation we're having, that now we can hear each other and so on? But was there some kind of a thought wave pattern that was happening? Is that a dimensional thing? A dimensional dynamic? But who's to say it stops there? Does it go on and on and on? Are there many, many, many more dimensions? How do we know this? Through transcendence, through raising ourselves from our physical body, from our intellectual body into our spiritual body, and allowing that to transcend into something that is beyond what we recognize in the 3 dimensions that we live in as an ordinary being. The only way there is through meditation. It doesn't matter whether it's a Buddhist meditation, or it's a Jewish meditation, or it's a Christian meditation, or a Hindu meditation, or Islamic meditation. It doesn't matter. It's being able to get to that point, that point of transcendence. They all teach it. Some may be better than others. And then you realize this within yourself, and you become like the fountain of youth. You become like the fountain of wisdom. All this starts coming up, glimpse after glimpse. If you're reading that book, glimpse after glimpse. And he's identifying these different aspects of that. So we can read it and we can say, that's what it is. We begin to identify it more and more and more. So we have to, within this realm of phenomena, we have to behave. We have to conduct ourselves. This is activity that we're doing and so on. And we recognize virtue and non-virtue. through all these causal relationships that are happening and so on. And then and the non-objectified loving kindness is the bodhisattva path of insight mind, the eighth bhumi, the unborn dharma mind. This is when you reach that level of perceiving yourself as the sun. Perceiving, not being, but you start recognizing that power. At that point, at that eighth bhumi level, you have overcome the emotions. So before you can get there, it means you got a lot of work to do. You got to be among all these beings, as you asked, how can we be among all this suffering and still be transcendent? Well, in this way, we see how it's done. We do that. You're already transcendent in many ways that maybe you take for granted, you don't recognize. You can be in certain situations and people are suffering and, it's just kind of going right through you. Or you may feel, a heart twinge or something like that, but you're able to go and in a day or so, if not an hour, maybe you've forgotten about it. So in that way, you've overcome those emotions. But then there are certain things that happen that you never forget. You see certain things you never forget until you become transcendent and you're able to leave those things behind. There are imprints when we were kids of things that happened to us, and many of us spend fortunes going into, psychotherapy and so on to find these things that happened when we were 4 years old or 2 years old or 7 years old or something that we have repressed. And during our meditation development, some of these things come up, things that you haven't thought about in 40 or 50 years. And then you have to deal with them. So this is the path of insight. This is the eighth bhumi, the unborn dharma mind. When you can get to that level, and then these things come up, and then you have tools to be able to deal with them. You've gotten to a very high level in that spiral. So then the method of loving kindness practice. This is altruistic loving. There's 4 points here. It says the kindness of countless mother giving you a body, kindness of the countless mothers undergoing hardships for you, kindness of giving you life, protection, kindness of showing you the world. So these are the 4 kindnesses that the mother has shown you. So we can say maybe it wasn't literally your mother, but maybe it was your parent of some type. Maybe it was your auntie, or maybe it was your granny, or someone in your family, or it was something in wherever you came from. Maybe you grew up in an orphanage or something like that. But there were beings there, to help you. And maybe they had their limitations, and maybe they didn't do a good job of it. Maybe you had to raise yourself. But we identify this as the loving kindness of the mother who bore our body for 9 months. And afterwards, they had to deal with carrying this infant, right? Bringing this being into the world, and how it changed their body and so on. And how they had to risk their life doing this, because in many, many situations, being pregnant, carrying a child can be life-threatening to the mother. And to whatever degree they accept that responsibility, they accept that risk. There's loving kindness in that. And then the loving kindness now of having to raise that child and to teach that child right from wrong, what to do, how to get along in the world and so on. The loving kindness that it takes for that. And this is like the first 2 years of the child's life. So now it's 3 years since the time they became pregnant to the time now that they're raising this kid, 3 years that they put their life on a hold, on a virtual hold, so that they could give everything that they have for the sake of the child. So they've sacrificed. They've made great sacrifices for themselves for the benefit of the child. So these are loving kindness practices. And to be able to visualize this, we revert to the mother, thinking of the mother. And if you remember, we say all mothers, sentient beings, all these beings are our mothers. If we think of all beings as our mothers, all of a sudden, loving kindness and compassion opens up to us. Instead of being closed up, oh, those people, I don't care about them. But if you view that person as being your mother, as being someone's mother, being my mother in a past life, or maybe being a mother in a future life, or maybe I'll be their mother or something. When you put it in that context, now you have a way of opening yourself up with support. So the measure of the practice of loving kindness is when one does not desire happiness for oneself, but one only for other sentient beings. That is the perfection of the practice of loving kindness. When we see ourselves doing things for the benefit of others, more than for ourselves. When we see ourselves sacrificing over and over again. It's easier to do for our kids and for our family, but sometimes that's difficult. After a hard day, you're coming home from work and all you want to do is just get in your chair and eat something and relax. And then here comes your kids, or here comes your wife, or here comes a phone call from your parents or somebody wanting you to do something else. And then how easy is it for you to be able to say, okay, let me take a deep breath. Let me count to 10. Let me re-engage. Or do we selfishly hold on to ourselves and we say, no, I can't help you do that. I'm sorry. Find somebody else. So the measure of our practice of loving kindness is the degree in which we're able to put our own attachment, our own grasping, our own clinging on hold and do for others. So the 8 qualities or the benefits of loving kindness here are identified. One will be loved by the gods. One will be loved by human beings. One will be protected by human beings. One will achieve mental peace. One will achieve many happinesses. One will not be harmed by poisons or weapons. One will achieve his or her wishes without effort. One will be reborn in the God realms. So these are all characterizations. These are all, points of contemplation. They're qualities. They're things that we use as criteria to evaluate, our motivations sometimes. Sometimes we're doing these things for selfish means, saying, well, if I do this, they're going to love me. This is why I should do it, because they're going to love me. Or are you doing it for their sake? But you can't deny that there's benefits here too. So it's a matter of being able to put this in perspective and how attached to these things do you become? This is also attaching to the peace. These are forms of that peace. The pleasure of peace. So, it's taking something now that's a little bit more concrete and ideas here, 8 ideas, but then abstracting them again. So any questions or points that you want to talk about? Is it making sense? Is it making no sense? You want to stand up and stretch? You want to take a short break and come back?
Lance, I have more of maybe, I don't even know if I have a question, maybe like a thought,
Okay.
just to help me solidify this tonight's driving point. So the yeah, because I'm struggling a little bit. I'm listening to other people's questions and I'm trying to digest. I'm struggling with this, but I think that's the way. I think that's the process here. You're slow, like you said, 20 more questions come up. I think that's a really good way to put that. So, so for example, like the idea here is like we have to put ourselves first, and like I guess the word I would use is like selfishness, right? Like, and this is my journey. There are things I'm working through, and then I see people who are homeless or people who are clearly more disadvantaged than me, but then I get distracted by that, and I want to go save that person, right? But actually the hardest thing to do is to stay focused on my own self, right, in that moment, and that's kind of what you were trying to get at when you said when you come home and there's things you need to do for yourself, but then all these other sort of things come into that circle quickly. But you're saying the takeaway point is, how do you work on sort of the selfish part of nurturing your own journey right now and not getting distracted to get caught in other people's struggles or suffering, and that's really the meat of what one of the things, the highlights of what we're getting at, and that's hard for me right now. I'm struggling with this right now.
Well, there's a dynamic there, and there's a balance there, and the balance shifts over time. So, initially we may have to be more selfish, but with an open mind, knowing, well, I need to stabilize my own life, my own psyche, my own sense of happiness. I need to stabilize that to a degree, but not beyond that degree, where I can begin to help other people. That I'm not, taking more than I need, putting it in the bank, so to speak, and never satisfying what I need to put in the bank so that I can help other people. I just become greedy and take more and more and more and more. Or do I get just enough what I need to be able to get my balance, and now I'm ready to help other beings?
Is there any sort of objective way? So so for example, like the material example, like were you talking about, like, let's say money, for example. So like my family, we're talking about different religions, and my dad has always modeled giving a certain percentage of income to, some disadvantaged groups or something meaningful. So I always do that every year. I give a percentage of my income. So that's a clear example, because I have more than I need. I have a shelter, I can pay my bills. So I'm happy to give that. Is there any other way, though, like that you help people understand that concept in a more concrete way, as to know, like, okay, now, like, for example, don't worry about other people if you don't have a meditation practice. First, go get your meditation practice and established before you're starting to volunteer all this extra discretionary time. Spend that first on developing a meditation practice. Do you have something like that that would help me, I guess? I don't know if anyone else has these sorts of questions.
Oh,
So I want to say something?
yeah, don't you have to feed yourself before you can feed somebody else? Like you were talking about with the airplane.
Yeah.
When the thing drops out, you have to do yourself. You have to make yourself strong enough before you can help somebody else. If you left that off, you'd be weakening yourself. But you have to put that on, that, and you can paraphrase it any way you want to do it. I have to feed myself so that I can get up and go to work and feed my family, or make extra money so that I can give it to some kind of an organization, Save the World organization or something like that. There's something that I feel I can only do so much. and I might be able to give $10, and maybe that's all I can afford to give, but that's something. But I have to be myself, strong enough in a position to maintain my place as a husband, father, whatever, and give that $10 out. So, you know, is it selfish for me to want to give that $10 out? Is it selfish for me to want to feed myself so that I can go to work to earn the $10? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, you're saying basically the same thing that Zara was saying, you know, and there's other examples, and you, Zara, hit on it when you said about, being a teacher or something like that. You know, a teacher has to spend, many, many more time preparing for the teaching. They give the teaching and then they go back and they have to prepare for the next teaching. So there's a lot of time that's being expended for the sake of the teaching. And maybe that's time that the teacher might like to be developing something that they need that is beyond what their students need. But they say, okay, I can get to that sometime, I can read that book another time or something like that. It's more important for me now to be working with these students who really, need this nurturance at this time. Let me help them. And then that other time to read that book will come later on, and it's finding those balances, and that's part of the loving kindness. That's part of the compassion that we have for beings. And it's a dynamic. It changes. And we have to be able to read the changes and flow with the changes and so on. So I think you hit on the idea, and the way in which it manifests, there's many different ways in which it manifests. Those are the two that come to my mind right now.
Lance, I'm reminded of like glimpse after glimpse. I don't know if you referenced this last week, but like they talked about like in the Western culture, like when people say, "Oh, I don't have time to do X, Y, or Z," it's another form of laziness, not willing to make it and prioritize.
Right.
One of the most difficult.
I'm too busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel that, and it could be with some of the things we're talking about, like I'm too busy volunteering and I already do all these other things for these other organizations. I go to church, I help kids, homeless people, but then you sort of give yourself a way out of actually.
Well, those are good things, but what about the compulsive person who goes around the house cleaning all the time?
Mm-hmm.
The house is great, it probably wouldn't need to be cleaned for a month. But some people have compulsively are going around cleaning all the time. That's an example of the laziness that says, oh, I don't have time to study because I got to clean all the time.
Okay.
It borders on the neuroses.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have that problem, I'm told.
All right, well, good.
That's another story.
So it's the rationalizations that we make, for keeping us from setting a good priority and seeking it to fruition, working for it to fruition.
Thank you.
Okay. So then we'll move to compassion now. So compassion, like I said, is the other side of wisdom, the other side of loving kindness. Or the other side of wisdom and loving kindness are the same. The actualization of that loving kindness, of that wisdom, is the compassion or the method or the skillful means. Skillful means knowing how to actualize that wisdom. So the compassion, when loving kindness is perfected, in this way, the practice of compassion is not difficult. So having that becomes very easy to us. So if we have that, joining those groups like you were talking about to go and help these people, to be able to write the check, once a year or once a month or whatever it is that you do for giving to other people and so on, becomes very easy for you, becomes second nature, becomes something that you want to do. There's an enjoyment there because you are helping other people and so on. So you derive an enjoyment from that, knowing that you're doing that. So it's not difficult, it becomes effortless, is true compassion. Compassion, a mind that wants all sentient beings to separate from suffering and its cause. So it's a mind that wants to separate, that wants all sentient beings to separate from suffering and its cause. So in the wisdom, you recognize what is causing the suffering in other beings or in yourself. You know that. You have the wisdom to recognize that. Now, having the skillful means to be able to separate and say, here's the cause for that. And because here's the cause, now there's an antidote for that, if I know what the cause is. So it says here 3 points. It says the compassion with sentient beings as its object, seeing suffering beings in lower realms, compassion with phenomena as its object, well trained in the practice of the Four Noble Truths, understanding cause and effect, cause and result, understands impermanence for oneself and the confusion of others who do not understand, and non-objectified compassion. One is established in equipoise and realizes all phenomena as the nature of emptiness. So it's like we've been talking about, it's being able to see why people are in the hell realms. We're talking about the psychophysical. They're human beings. But why is the junkie a junkie? Why is the murderer a murderer? Why is the sex offender a sex offender? Why are they in this hell? It's like these demons are talking to them. Why is the guy who's having to take pharmaceutical drugs all the time? It's like they have these demons within themselves. And as a wise person, as a person of loving kindness, we can see that, although the perpetrator, they may not be able to see it for themselves. They can't recognize the causes that are manifesting this. Maybe it's something in their early lifetime. Maybe you have the ability to be able to help them to recognize that. It's like I said, something that was repressed when they were 7 or 8 years old or something becomes the cause for these things when they're 20 or 30 or 40 years old. So it's being able to recognize this. So this is seeing suffering beings in the lower realms, those that are acting like animals, those that are full of greediness, miserableness, those that are suffering because of killing, of things that they've done, and so on. So it's being able to recognize this. And then the next one is the phenomena as its object and the practice of the Four Noble Truths. So we can see that the Four Noble Truths, that all life has suffering. The cause of the suffering is our desire, our attachment, our clinging to this life and all its permutations. So the result is the suffering. Number 1 noble truth. The cause of it is number 2 noble truth, the attachment. Number 3 is the truth of the cessation, of renunciation, that what we need to do is stop doing these things. Just cut these things off. That's the result, that we stop doing this. But number 4, noble truth number 4 is the Eightfold Path, which is the cause for the cessation, which gives us the tools to be able to cut ourselves off from these things. So we see that it's a series of cause and effects that are creating everything that we know. This karma, cause and effect, all these relationships, the 6 human realms, and so on. So all this, so we begin to see it in a macrocosm kind of a way. So we understand impermanence for oneself and the confusion of others who do not understand. So this impermanence, the thing that helps us to cut through is impermanence, is this notion that all this is all just contrived. All this is all compounded nature. We have created this web for ourselves that we're made all these connection points that keep us so busy that we can't allow ourselves to get the perspective to be able to look at it objectively and be able to see this, to get out of ourselves and see that we were like a spider weaving this web for ourselves. And then slowly, when we recognize that and we have the confidence, we have the tools, then we start cutting these things, these tendrils that are holding this web together and so on. Some of them break on their own just by our purifying, by our not doing these things. We don't need to do these things and they just go away. They just evaporate, so to speak. You know? So we need to recognize that. So this is the compassion for ourselves to be able to do this, and then the compassion for others to be able to help them to do that. Any therapist, I'm sure, is doing that. You know, that's their job, is to help people to do these things for themselves. The therapist doesn't do it for them. It shows them how they made these connections and how they can help themselves to sever these connections and free themselves, to liberate themselves from these demons that are talking to them, that are rationalizing all these points and so on. And then the non-objectified compassion is one established in equipoise and realizes all phenomena as the nature of emptiness. So this equipoise is this balance, this equipoise, having the strength and the bliss in the center, in the heart center. And this comes from contemplation, this comes from study, it comes from receiving teachings, it comes from meditation, you know, and this is the result of the meditation. This is the course result of meditation. You get this sense of bliss. You get this sense of centeredness, this sense of stability, strength within yourself. And this is the equipoise. And the more that you do these, the more that you recognize all these things coming together, the more stable this becomes, the more the true nature that this is an expression of, that this equipoise is a reflection of, or is an expression of, more than a reflection, an expression of this, the more stable that becomes, of that stability, of that strength. The more things that you can take in, the more things that you can be around in this phenomenal world and not be upset by. You know, when the bodhisattva can be in the midst of all this terrible stuff, how can the therapist work all day, every day with all these people that have all these very serious problems over and over and over again? How can they do that? Because they have reached some degree of equipoise where they can compartmentalize their professional work from their private lives. And those that can't, you know, they have these implosions, you know, they kind of cave in on themselves and so on. And maybe they begin to take on, you know, many of the blockages that their clients have, that their patients have, and so on. They burn out. You know, we've seen that happen many, many times. And I know a couple of you guys are therapists and so on, and you help people with this. So I'm sure that you can relate to this. So that's what we need. So this is the part of non-objectified compassion, where we reach this equipoise. So this is, again, the example of the sun, that the sun is giving forth all this light, giving forth all this heat, giving forth all this other energy that is invisible to us, but yet it's sustaining many different things in many different ways that we don't comprehend. I mean, all these gamma rays and beta ray, all these different things that are invisible to us, but yet it's all around us. And some of it we don't see in this atmosphere because it's being filtered out. But if we go out in space, it's all out there. And there's other life out there that we don't recognize yet. There's being cultivated, or there's being supported by these energy forms that we just don't understand. But as we develop this transcendence, we don't have to understand it so much as just be it. You know, and all of its ramifications, all of its details become self-evident. So saying that is an experience. Saying that is a realization. So it can't be conveyed any other way. So the method of compassionate practice, or method of compassion practice, is we consider all beings as your mother in a hell realm or one of the 5 other realms. Why would compassion not arise? So meditate on the compassionate desire to free such beings from the sufferings of these realms. So like we thought of our mother in terms of loving kindness, that she bore our bodies and so on like that. Now we visualize our mothers suffering in the 6 realms of samsara, that they are in the hell realms, and they're constantly being tortured by demons who are killing them over and over and over again. They revive and they're killed again by these self-manifested demons within the mother. And don't we have compassion for the mother? And wouldn't we want to do something to help our mother in that situation? So we think of those demons constantly terrorizing and constantly causing death and rebirth in that suffering way. And then in the hungry ghost realm, we think of these beings as being thirsty and hungry, insatiable, unable to quench their thirst, unable to satisfy their hunger. Wouldn't we want to help our mothers in that situation and give them the nourishment they need, to give them the food they need, to give them the water that they need, and so on, to be able to help them in that way? So we think of all beings like that. And then in the animal realm, the animal realms are enslaved and are always being eaten by each other and are going through this continuum of just moving about in this ignorant manner. Wouldn't we want to help our mother to provide her with an education, to allow herself to recognize who she is and what her ignorance is doing to her, and how she can liberate herself from this animalistic mode of living and stop being enslaved and stop being consumed by others, you know, by their children, or by their, not literally, but just emotionally, you know, how some parents sometimes are just consumed by their families. So we visualize that, and this evokes our compassion. This awakes our compassion. Or as a human being, that the beings are constantly in the midst of desire, always wanting something, that they are suffering from old age and sickness and death. And so we want to help something with our mother to relieve her of the suffering that she has from her getting old, from her becoming feeble and so on, to do things for her, to help her with her sickness, to make sure she gets her medicines, to make sure she takes her medicines, all these different things that we do for the sake of our mother, to give them the presents, the gifts, and the gift of time to be with them, to help them to ease their time as they get older and so on. So we do that for our mother. We visualize other beings as our mother, and we do things to help them in the same way. And then in the jealous God realm, the beings who are suffering from conflict all the time. They're fighting among themselves to manipulate more and more people, to get the power from more and more people, or the manipulation of being able to have your own self-aggrandizement, you know, that the jealous beings want to have, that they are superior from all the other beings, they're the best and so on, and that they want to be like gods. They create this self-manifestation of conflict with the gods because they want to be revered as gods. But here they recognize that they're only being revered because they have power over these beings. They're manipulating them, and they can't let up on the manipulation. The moment they let up on the manipulation, the moment they show a weakness, they know that they're going to be subdued. They know that they're going to be overcome. So they have to keep this constant conflict going on. So we have to visualize our mother as being in that realm, like that, in that conflict. And wouldn't we want to help our mothers, to show that compassion for them? And then in the God realm, those beings in the God realm who are so lofty, all caught up in their own euphoria and being taken care of by other beings and so on, and not being aware of the suffering of other beings, not having any compassion or so on, and then having the precipitous fall, that when their life ends, they have this immediate fall to the lower realms because of all the time that they ignored the suffering of the beings who were supplicating them for help, and they refused help because they were making themselves unaware of that. So if that was our mother, how we would intercede, how we would try and show her compassion. You know, and we use the example of an artist, you know, painting something or playing music or composing something, a book or something that showed the compassion of what it is to be an ordinary human being. So this godlike mother could have understanding of what it is, and to be able to come down from their lofty perch and be able to help other beings. So this is compassion. This is the mode of method of practice to free beings from their suffering. So then we said Buddhist compassion, not to make samsara better, but to get rid of samsara, unconditioned, non-judgmental forgiveness. Buddhist compassion, not to make samsara better, but to get rid of samsara, unconditional, non-judgmental forgiveness. What does this mean? This is a serious thought, because I think we begin to naturally have this thing, oh, we can make a difference and we can stop all this suffering. We can stop all this division. We can change this, you know? And you know, do we really ever do that? Has it really ever been done before? Is it possible to even do it? Does it fly in the face of what dualistic nature is? That there is this conflict, there is this dualism that is built in to this phenomenal nature. Is it not part of the human condition? We can't change that any more than we can change, then we could easily cut off our hand or our arm. But what we can do is not to be judgmental about it, not to be, how does it say it? It says to be unconditional, non-judgmental forgiveness, to let it go, to be able to rise above all these vicissitudes, to rise above all these changes that are going on and not allow ourselves to be affected by them, to be non-emotional, unemotional, to be able to get through that. And it takes practice to be able to do that. It takes skillful means to be able to do that over and over again. We have to do that, that we recognize we're not going to make a change for everybody. We accept that, but we're not going to judge those who are still creating this for themselves and for others. All we're going to do is offer them what we have accomplished ourselves to be able to be transcendent. The sunshine, the heat of the sun. I'm offering you this. If you take it, that's wonderful. If you don't take it, okay, that's okay too, you know, but I'm going to continue shining for you until you're able to take it. So we have that non-judgmental, non-president, non-president, how do you say, we have no prejudice against those that do not take it. We have this equanimity.
And
Yes.
within that context, we can only end the samsara for ourselves, but not for others. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yes. We can help them, give them the tools as much as possible, but they have to end their own. They have to liberate themselves. Yes, just like we have to do it. Nobody can do it for us.
Right.
We have teachers, we have guides, we have examples, but still it's us who makes the decisions, that makes the changes. So how do we measure the compassion of the practice? When one has fully purified self-cherishing, is fully released or cut from the chain of self-cherishing, when free from the depths of mind, one desires all sentient beings to be free from suffering, then one has perfected the practice of compassion. So what that means is that when we can recognize what's happening around us, what's happening on television, what's happening, you know, and in the hospital, when we pass the hospital, the suffering that's in there, when we pass the offices and the factories and the places where people are toiling and working and so on, and the suffering, and always be aware that people are suffering, you know, and that they are doing so by their own volition, but then that there are ways to cut through, and that you can help them to whatever degree you can, but there is a way out of that suffering, and by recognizing that. So that is, it says, one desires all sentient beings to be free from suffering, then one has perfected the practice of compassion. To see that in this ocean of suffering, all beings are suffering. Not just human beings, but animals and the insects and the fish in the sea and other animals in the sea and those in the atmosphere, all this stuff, you know, and see it as the ocean of suffering, but not to be obsessed by it, by not allowing it to eat yourself up, by being able to have a equipoise with that. Yes, they are doing this to themselves. Yes, I used to do this myself, but yes, I have reached a level at which I am unattached to this suffering, and I'm still working, I'm still breathing, I'm still trying to help other beings and to help myself, but I don't forget. And then the qualities of compassion, when through loving kindness one wants all beings to achieve happiness, and through compassion one wants all beings to be free from suffering, then one is no longer interested in achieving one's own peace and happiness. Then one is delighted to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. This becomes the remedy to attachment to the pleasure of peace. So what this means is that you're no longer thinking of yourself at all. Remember I said that this was the obscuration of wisdom awareness, that you no longer matter, that you can transcend your attachment to yourself. You no longer have to be present for those beings. You just become those beings. You become part of the nature of what all things are. You become the sun. You become the space. You become the light. You become all this for its own sake, with no regard of who it is that you are. This is transcendent. It can be, I'm thinking out loud here, that can be a conduit for us to other dimensions that are beyond our ordinary three-dimensional lifestyles and thoughts and so on like that. And maybe that's what it does. It leads to something else. It's non-conceptual for us. It's experienced through our meditation. It's realized through our meditation. And when we experience it, we have such words come to our mind like bliss and love and very simple things. And then we come back from that experience, and then those tendrils of those webs that we have woven for ourselves, as I said, they start breaking all by themselves. Some we have to be a little bit more forceful with, but some just break all together by themselves. And then we just become liberated. We just become, we just kind of like float, using that word, but it's just in the midst of all this, just not affected by the suffering, not affected by the happiness. We're beyond the dualism. This becomes the remedy to the attachment of the pleasure of peace. Peace is just the concept of dualism. So therefore, by developing loving kindness and compassion in the mind, one cherishes others more than oneself. So what this means is that once we attain some degree of balance for ourselves, some degree of stability for ourselves in our spirituality, we begin to do for others. And then by doing for others, it's reciprocal. It comes right back to us. And we're helping ourselves. We become part of their fabric, and their fabric is part of us. We see it all as the same. If they're unhappy, I'm unhappy. If I'm unhappy, they're unhappy. If they're happy, I can be happy, and so on. So it really is that simple, to express it that way. But the work is in the doing all this, is in the purification of all these things that are blocking us up, all the attachments, all the hatreds, making us aware of our delusions, and working to overcome all that.
Good question, Lance.
Yes.
So speaking of being attached to peace, whenever we have those moments throughout the day, and I'm pretty sure that everybody has that moment, I know I do, kind of like when you're thinking that I need, a moment of quietness. I need my meditation. I need to sit down and just like sort out through those thoughts. Would that be kind of like a sign of attachment to peace? Like I want my, I want to put all this behind. I want my peace. I want to be on the cushion. I want to be, in my quiet corner. Is that a sign of attachment?
Well, it could be. It depends how obsessive about it you are and how selfish you are about it. I mean, common sense says you've got to do things to get yourself stable so that you can continue your work. So where is that balance? For you, it's going to be different than it's going to be for somebody else. But you still have that degree that you have to do. You can't be so sacrificial. You can't act like a martyr all the time that you just give everything of yourself to other people and don't have any strength for yourself. I mean, you're going to implode, very quickly. You're not going to have enough reserves to be able to sustain yourself. Doesn't that make sense? So you have to find where that balance is for yourself. And that's why we meditate every day. That's why we try to do something to help us to be aware of finding that equipoise for ourselves. Maybe we can't meditate every day, but maybe it's every other day, or maybe it's on the weekends, whatever your lifestyle is. But you got to find where it is. I've said this to you before, you know, in your lifetime, in your life, where you are now, you're in the middle of your life. You got a family, you've got a business, you've got people counting on you, you've got priorities that are practical priorities. You just can't leave that and go sit on the cushion someplace. However, that doesn't mean that you can't find time now to sit on the cushion and then be able to get yourself to a point later in your life where now you can prioritize sitting on the cushion as being your top priority.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't that practical?
Sure is.
I mean, does it make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. You do have to find that balance, and I think over the years, you can see that that balance. You can push yourself more and more through some struggles, but there's a breaking point that you kind of like need to be like, okay, I just need to step back for a little while. Yeah, I don't see that as a moment of weakness. I just see it just like the way it is, and just need to get back to the basics or whatever, sort things out, and continue on. Yeah.
Good. Yes. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay. Well, I hope you take this to heart and you contemplate this, that you make some time. You know, if you need some help, talking about developing a practice, I'll be more than glad to help you. Maybe you can talk to Kempo Samdup or someone else, another friend, a spiritual friend or something like that. But there's help there if you ask for it. And we've all been there. This is how we've all grown. Remember we talk about, we have this working basis, but we have these contributory causes, which are our teachers. And we need to invite them in sometimes when we're stuck. So, but by doing things that seem to be impossible to us, pushing ourselves a little bit, like Adrian was just saying, pushing through a little bit, having the commitment vow that I really want to do this, do we get that indestructibility? Do we get that breakthrough? If we don't set the commitment, it's not going to happen by itself. Nobody's going to come and knock on your door and say, oh, here, I got this peace of mind for you. Here it is. You got to work for it yourself. And what we're offering here is a system by which to attain that. Okay. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. So next week we'll do chapter 8, the refuge and the precepts. So the refuge has to do with the vows and so on. And that'll be the last part of our cycle of teachings with Buddhism 101. And we can talk about what we want to do next, if we want to continue on the book and continue through the next chapters, or we want to start over again, or whatever you might want to do. And we may have to think our time frame when we do this, instead of Saturday nights, to make way for Kempo to have his teachings and practices so we can partake that. So let's do our dedication, please. So let's go to page number, the De Korma prayer, and then we'll do the dedication prayer by Lord Jigden Sumgun. So whatever page that's on. My book is page number 20, so on yours maybe it's 22 or 24 or something like that. Okay? So we recite this out loud together. By the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate word of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Trikampa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind root and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Yogins, Yoginis, and Dakinis, dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the three times by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana and the innate word of virtue not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Sravaka or Pratyeka Buddha. May all mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Maras and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I, in any case, gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo. Om, ah, hum. Om, ah, hum. Om, ah, hum. The body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones, may my body, speech, and mind become inseparable. Thank you.